At the launch event of our new bridal collection in front of 40 VIP guests, my son grabbed the silver heirloom scissors that had belonged to his father and tossed them into a trash can. "This cheap, useless piece of junk doesn't belong in a place this elegant," he said with a laugh. His wife smirked beside him, clearly enjoying every second. The room fell silent. My heart broke as I stood there. In that moment, I realized the biggest mistake of my life was giving them the money to open this studio, only to be humiliated by them. Take a breath with me. Quick pause before we start. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated you, yes or no? Your perspective might help someone else today. A quick note. Some details here are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters most is the message about standing strong when others try to tear you down. At 68, I stood in my own studio watching my son destroy everything I had built, my hands calloused from 40 years at the sewing table, clenched at my sides. The November evening had started perfectly. 40 VIP guests filled Langford Stitch House, my Pearl District studio that had been my life's work since Edmund and I opened it in 1980. White wedding gowns hung throughout the space like elegant ghosts, each one representing months of careful work. Champagne glasses caught the spotlight, creating small constellations across the exposed brick walls. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. I stood at the center of it all, holding a small velvet box. My 45-year-old son, Nolan, stood beside me under the studio spotlights, his sandy hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Zinnia Voss, my 34-year-old daughter-in-law, stood at his other side in a designer dress, her smile as polished as her resume, and just as fake. I opened the velvet box. "These scissors belong to your grandfather, Edmund," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "He used them for 42 years, and I want you to have them now." The silver scissors caught the light. Edmund had given them to me the day we opened this studio, his hands steady and sure as he placed them in mine. Now those same scissors would pass to our son, the next generation of Langford craftsmanship. Nolan stared at them. Then he glanced at Zinnia. It was quick, a fraction of a second, but I saw it. His eyes flicked to her face, reading something there I couldn't see. She gave the smallest nod. He picked up the scissors like they were contaminated. "Mom," he said, his voice too loud in the quiet room, "did you really think a rusty old pair of scissors belongs in a luxury studio?" The words hit like needles, sharp, precise, deliberately placed. "They're not rusty," I said quietly. My father ran a small-town tailor shop." Nolan's smile was Zinnia's smile, now borrowed and cruel. "This is a modern bridal design house. We're trying to build something here, and you keep dragging us backward with your sentiment." He walked to the decorative trash can in the corner, the one we'd placed there as a prop, empty except for a single white ribbon, and he dropped Edmund's scissors inside. The sound of metal hitting metal echoed through the studio. Someone gasped. Mira Drake, my 31-year-old seamstress, stood backstage with her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "Cheap, worthless trash," Zinnia added, her voice carrying that particular tone that made everything sound reasonable and final, just like everything else from that generation. I didn't move, couldn't move. 40 years of Edmund's hands thrown away like garbage in front of 40 witnesses. The party dissolved after that. Guests made awkward goodbyes, their eyes sliding away from mine. Some touched my arm as they passed. Others pretended they hadn't seen anything at all. Nolan and Zinnia left first, his hand on her lower back, guiding her toward the door like she was precious cargo. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She'd already won. "I'm so sorry, Beatrice," someone murmured. "I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say," I heard myself reply. "Go home, I'll lock up." The studio emptied slowly. Soon it was just me standing among the white dresses that suddenly felt like ghosts of something dead, rather than celebrations of something beginning. I walked past the trash can without looking at it. My hands were shaking. If I stopped, if I looked down, I would break. "Beatrice, Mira's voice gentle. "Go home, Mira." "But, please." I heard her gather her things, heard the back door close. And then I was alone. 40 years. That's how long Edmund's hands had held those scissors before they touched mine. 40 years of wedding dresses, christening gowns, funeral suits, and every small repair that came through our door. Those scissors had been part of 10,000 moments, each one a tiny stitch holding someone's life together. Now they were trash. I walked out the front door, locking it behind me. The Pearl District street was quiet, the November air cold enough to sting. My car was 3 blocks away. I made it 2 blocks before I had to stop one hand against a brick wall, breathing hard. But I didn't cry, not yet. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know for months, was that after I left, Mira came back. She had her key. She let herself in through the back door, moving quietly through the empty studio. The white dresses hung motionless in the dark. She walked to the trash can. The scissors lay at the bottom, the silver dull under the emergency exit light. Mira pulled them out carefully, wiping them clean with the hem of her shirt. She wrapped them in the white ribbon that had been at the bottom of the trash, then slipped them into her handbag. "Edmund's hands," she whispered to the empty room. "I won't let them end in the trash." She stood there for a moment, holding her handbag close. On the wall above her, a small red light blinked steadily. The security camera I'd installed 6 months earlier after a break-in 3 studios down. It recorded everything 24 hours a day, 30 days of rolling footage before it erased and started over. The scissors were safe in Mira's bag, and everything that had happened tonight was safe on that camera. She didn't know it then, but that small act of loyalty would become the most important thing she ever did. Mira didn't notice the blinking light as she left. Why would she? She wasn't thinking about evidence or proof or the future. She was thinking about the weight of 42 years being thrown away like it meant nothing. The camera kept recording long after she locked the door and disappeared into the November night. And I, alone in my house 3 miles away, sat staring at Edmund's photograph on my mantel, finally letting the tears come. I didn't know about Mira's rescue. I didn't know about the camera. I only knew that my son had chosen his wife over his mother, and that choice had included destroying the one thing I'd wanted him to treasure. But somewhere in the empty studio, that red light kept blinking, recording everything. The house was too quiet after I left the studio, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat and every thought you've been trying to avoid. I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing my good dress, staring at the wedding photograph on my dresser. Edmund and I, 42 years ago, standing outside the shop we'd just opened. His hands held mine, and in my hands I held those silver scissors inscribed with words I could still recite. To my partner in every stitch. Edmund Langford had been gone 3 years, but his voice still lived in every corner of this house, teaching me lessons I was only now beginning to understand. "Every cut has to be intentional, bae," he used to say. "You don't just cut fabric, you cut towards something beautiful." Tonight, my son had cut something, but it wasn't fabric. I walked to my dresser and pulled open the bottom drawer. Underneath old sweaters, I kept a fireproof document box. Inside were the papers I rarely looked at but always knew were there. I spread them across the bed. Lease agreement for Langford Stitch House. Tenant Beatrice Langford. Business license. Owner Beatrice Langford. Trademark registration. Holder Beatrice Langford. Investment account retirement savings. Sole owner Beatrice Langford. My name, only my name, on every single document. Nolan's name appeared nowhere. Not on the lease, not on the business license, not on the trademark application. He'd promised to add me to the incorporation papers to make it official, but he never had, and I'd never pushed. I sat back down, documents scattered around me like evidence. My hands were shaking, not from grief this time, from something that felt like the ground shifting. I picked up the wedding photograph. "Edmund, what would you do if you could see what our son became?" The photograph didn't answer, but I knew what Edmund would say. Being kind and being a fool aren't the same thing. Don't confuse them. 3 years Edmund had been gone, and I still reached for the phone to call him when something felt wrong. Tonight, I wanted to hear his voice so badly it made my chest ache. But Edmund wasn't here to lie to me. and I was tired of lying to myself. I closed my eyes and let myself remember. October 2021, 13 months ago. Nolan had come to my house with a manila folder thick with business plans. His laptop showed glossy mock-ups of a high-end bridal studio in the Pearl District. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs, the kind of place where champagne costs more than the consultation. "I want to do this, Mom," he'd said, spreading papers across my kitchen table. "Elevate the Langford name. Bring it into the luxury market. But I need capital to start. $90,000 for first and last month's rent. Initial inventory marketing launch." Zinnia had sat beside him, quiet but present. She'd been his girlfriend then, not yet his wife. Her hands were folded on the table, her smile appearing at exactly the right moments when Nolan mentioned my name on the signage, when he talked about honoring Edmund's memory. Too perfect, too rehearsed. I'd looked at her across that table and seen something flicker in her eyes. Not excitement, not gratitude, something colder, more calculated. "We'll put your name on the sign, Mom," Nolan had said. "This is the Langford legacy continuing. Dad would have wanted this." "Your mother is so generous, Nolan," Zinnia had added, her voice warm as honey. "You're lucky to have her support." But her eyes had been on the papers, on the numbers, on the bank statement I'd left visible on the counter, the one showing my retirement account balance. I saw it, that flicker of calculation, cold and quick. The way she'd glanced at the statement, then at me, then smiled wider. I saw it, and I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being unfair to my son's girlfriend, projecting my own grief onto her because she wasn't Edmund. I told myself that mothers who questioned their sons' girlfriends were the villains in every story, the jealous women who couldn't let go. How many warning signs can a mother ignore before willful blindness becomes complicity? "I'll write you a check," I'd said. Nolan had hugged me. Zinnia had thanked me with words that sounded genuine and eyes that remained cold. And I'd signed that check for $90,000 while looking directly at the woman who would try to destroy me. The memory ended, and I was back in my bedroom holding Edmund's photograph documents scattered across the bed like accusations. I'd seen the truth that October morning. I'd seen it in Zinnia's eyes and her perfectly timed smiles, in the way she'd looked at my bank statement like a hunter looks at prey. And I'd chosen to be blind. I'd chosen my son's happiness over my own instincts. I'd chosen to believe the best because that's what mothers do. We ignore the calculation in a daughter-in-law's eyes. We pretend the two perfect smiles are genuine. We sign checks and co-sign leases and hand over our life savings because our children ask us to. I set the photograph back on the dresser, carefully arranging it exactly where it had always been. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror, 68 years old. Gray hair I'd stopped dyeing after Edmund died. Lines around my eyes from 40 years of squinting at tiny stitches. Hands that could still thread a needle in dim light, but shook when my son called me sentimental. I looked old, I looked tired, but I didn't look stupid. Not anymore. I gathered the documents and placed them back in the fireproof box, back under the sweaters, back in the drawer. But this time, I knew they were there. This time, I understood what they meant. My name, only my name, on everything that mattered. I signed that check for $90,000 while looking directly at the woman who would try to destroy me. And I told myself I was imagining things. Mothers do that. We see the best in our children even when the truth is standing right in front of us. 4 months after I signed that check, the studio opened to lines around the block and my name nowhere in sight. February 2022. The grand opening I'd funded but didn't plan. Fresh white roses filled every corner of Langford Stitch House, their scent mixing with champagne and the sharp chemical smell of new paint. 40 guests moved through the space like schools of expensive fish, their designer clothes catching the Edison bulb. Lighting Nolan had insisted would appeal to millennials with money. Wedding dresses hung throughout the studio like promises. I'd sewn half of them myself in the back room while Nolan and Zinnia attended networking events and chose furniture that cost more than my monthly rent. James Caldwell from Portland Monthly arrived with a camera and the kind of enthusiasm lifestyle reporters save for local success stories. He wore a blazer over a graphic t-shirt, the uniform of people who write about luxury they can't afford. "This is incredible," he said, notebook already open. "Tell our readers about the inspiration behind Langford Bridal. What's the family legacy here?" I stood backstage adjusting the lace on the final display dress, watching through the gap in the curtain. Nolan smiled the way Zinnia had taught him, confident, rehearsed, empty. "My wife and I wanted to honor tradition while bringing a modern aesthetic to Portland brides. The Langford name has always meant quality craftsmanship, and we're elevating that into the luxury market. My wife and I." Like he'd built this alone. Like the woman who'd actually sewn these dresses was a ghost, haunting her own studio. Zinnia stood beside him in a cream silk dress that probably cost what I paid for groceries in 3 months. Her hand rested on Nolan's arm, proprietary, possessive. She'd perfected the art of looking supportive while actually being in control. And the community response has been overwhelming. She added her voice, carrying that particular warmth that made everything sound like a philanthropic mission. "We've already booked out through next spring." James scribbled notes. "I heard you made a dress last year for the Hartley wedding that got a lot of attention. Was that the prototype for this venture?" My hand stilled on the lace. Zinnia's smile never wavered. "We're so grateful for early supporters who believed in our vision. That experience really showed us there was a market for elevated bridal design in Portland." She'd done it, answered the question without saying my name, without acknowledging that I'd made that dress, that I'd been making dresses in this city for 40 years while she was learning to walk. Mira Drake stood beside me, her face tight with anger. "They didn't even mention your name," she whispered. "Not once." "It's fine," I said, though we both knew it wasn't. "It's not fine, B. This is your studio, your business, your—" "It's complicated." But it wasn't complicated. It was simple. I had funded my own erasure, signed a check for it, smiled while it happened because mothers don't make scenes at their sons' grand openings. The interview continued. James asked about design philosophy, target demographics, pricing strategy. Nolan and Zinnia answered in the first-person plural. We, you, yes, are building a mythology where they were the visionaries and I was nothing. 6 months. That's how long it took for our studio to become their studio, while I remained in the back, needle in hand, making everything beautiful for a legacy that was slowly erasing my name. The opening party lasted until midnight. I left at 9, slipping out the back while Nolan gave another toast to success and partnership and dreams coming true. Nobody noticed I'd gone. 2 months later, Eleanor Hartley knocked on my door. April 2022, late afternoon. The kind of spring day where Portland pretends it might actually have summer. Eleanor Hartley. My 63-year-old neighbor had known Nolan since he was a boy, learning to thread needles at my kitchen table. She stood on my porch with her granddaughter, both of them looking uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to bother you at home, B," Eleanor said, "but I didn't want to go to the studio." I understood. The studio had a reception desk, now a scheduling system, a policy about consultations requiring a deposit. The studio didn't do favors anymore. "Come in," I said. Sophie Hartley, Eleanor's granddaughter, was 24 and getting married in 3 months, with a budget that didn't include $4,000 wedding dresses. She sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd taught her uncle to sew buttons when he was 7, and tried not to cry. "The studio quoted me $4,000, she said. "I can't ask my grandmother to—" "You're not asking," I interrupted. "I'm offering. Consider it a wedding gift from Edmund and me." Eleanor's eyes filled. "B, you don't have to—" "I want to." And I did. Not because Sophie needed a dress, though she did. Not because Eleanor had held my hand through Edmund's funeral and the year after when grief felt like drowning. Not even because Nolan's studio had priced out the kind of people we used to serve with pride. I wanted to because making this dress for free was the most expensive thing I could do. It was a statement, a rebellion, a reminder that some things still mattered more than profit margins and brand positioning. I took Sophie's measurements in my home workshop, the one behind the shop, the one that still smelled like Edmund's pipe tobacco, even though he'd been gone 3 years. I pulled ivory silk from my personal stash, the good stuff I'd been saving, and sketched a design that would make her look like grace itself. "You've always been the real Langford legacy, B," Eleanor said as they were leaving. Not what's hanging in that showroom window. I didn't tell her I'd funded that showroom. Didn't tell her my name was on all the legal documents while my son pretended I didn't exist. Didn't tell her that every dress in that window was either sewn by me or designed from patterns I'd spent 40 years perfecting. I just hugged her and promised the dress would be ready by July. I had built this business stitch by stitch for 40 years, and now I was building something else evidence, though I didn't know it yet. I worked on that dress every evening after closing the studio that still bore my husband's name, but not my own. Each stitch was a prayer for the girl getting married for Eleanor, who had held my hand through the darkest year of my life, and for Edmund, who taught me that the most valuable things you make are the ones you give away. The first time Zinnia physically blocked me from entering my own studio's meeting room, I thought it was a mistake. July 2022, 3 months after I'd started Sophie's dress, 5 months after the grand opening where my name had been carefully omitted from every interview. The studio was thriving in the way that made business magazines write glowing features about young entrepreneurs disrupting traditional industries. I was carrying fabric samples toward the meeting room, the one with glass walls that Zinnia had insisted we install during renovations, claiming transparency was good branding. Victoria Hayes, a 46-year-old investment executive whose daughter had worn one of my designs, arrived for her VIP consultation with expectations Zinnia couldn't meet. I reached for the door handle. Zinnia stepped into the doorway, her body a polite but absolute barrier. "Beatrice," she said, her voice warm and empty as a hotel lobby. "This consultation requires a very specific brand aesthetic. Perhaps it's best if you handle the back of housework today." I stared at her. "This is my studio." "It's our studio," she corrected, her smile never wavering. "And right now, our brand needs consistency and client experience. I'm sure you understand." She closed the door, not slammed, just closed with the kind of gentle finality that made arguing seem irrational. I stood outside the glass partition, fabric samples still in my hands, watching Zinnia gesture to the dress displays, watching her smile and nod and take credit for work she'd never touched. Victoria Hayes sat at the consultation table, her posture suggesting someone accustomed to getting what she paid for. Zinnia pulled up design portfolios on the tablet designs I'd sketched, modifications I'd perfected over 40 years. The sound was muted through the glass, but I could read body language. Victoria was asking questions. Zinnia was deflecting. Victoria's expression shifted from interested to skeptical. Then Victoria pointed at me through the glass. I saw her mouth move, saw Zinnia's smile tighten. "The craftsmanship here is extraordinary." Victoria was saying, her voice carrying through the glass partition when she raised it slightly. "Is that the woman who made the Hartley dress? I've been trying to meet her for months." Zinnia's hand moved to the tablet, swiping to a new screen. "Our team works very collaboratively. Now about your ceremony timeline." But Victoria was standing, walking toward the door. Zinnia moved faster, met her at the threshold, positioning herself between Victoria and me, with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. "I'd really love to discuss the design process with your seamstress," Victoria said. "Of course," Zinnia replied smoothly, "but she's working on a complex commission right now. Perhaps after we finalize your initial consultation." Victoria's expression said she knew a deflection when she heard one. She glanced at me one more time, then returned to the table. The door closed again. Mira Drake appeared at my elbow. "This is getting worse." "I know." "B, you need to—" "I know. But I didn't know. Not yet. Not the full scope of what was happening or how long it had been planned." I walked back to my sewing table, hands finding fabric automatically needle moving. Without thought, I had been invisible in this studio for months, but what I didn't know yet was that being invisible had given me time to watch everything. What I didn't know was that 2 years earlier, the woman now blocking me from my own clients had already decided I was worth stealing from. September 2020, 2 years before the scissors, 25 months before she married my son. 3 weeks after Nolan first brought her to Sunday dinner, and she'd smiled at me across the table, asking about my work with genuine seeming interest. She'd walked into the Multnomah County Records office on a Tuesday afternoon. Public building, public terminals. Nothing illegal about searching public records. She typed Langford into the property search database. Up came the residential property, the house behind the shop that Edmund and I bought in 1983. Owner Beatrice Langford, assessed value. Up came the commercial lease for Langford Stitch House. Tenant Beatrice Langford, square footage, monthly rent, lease term. Up came the business registration. Owner Beatrice Langford, date established, type of business. She printed everything. Sat at a public terminal surrounded by people researching their own property disputes and inheritance questions, printing page after page of my life's work reduced to legal documentation. Then she crossed the street to a coffee shop and opened her laptop. I know this because Graham Sterling, the attorney I would hire 2 years later, would find the digital trail, would find the archived email she'd sent to a friend whose server kept backups longer than Zinnia remembered. Met the family, she'd written. The old woman owns everything. The son is just a door. This is going to be easier than I thought. He's already halfway in love and she's desperate for him to settle down. I give it 18 months until the signature. 3 weeks. She had known my son for 3 weeks before she started calculating how to take everything I owned. 3 weeks of Sunday dinners where she'd asked about Edmund, about the studio's history, about how we'd built the business. Questions I'd thought showed interest. Questions that were actually reconnaissance. 3 weeks before she'd mapped out my assets and decided I was worth the investment of pretending to love my son. I learned all this later, sitting in Graham's office watching him spread the evidence across his conference table, the same way I used to spread fabric samples, seeing the dates, the searches, the archived emails that revealed what I'd been too hopeful to see. 3 dates, Graham had said. That's all I needed to prove she had targeted you from the very beginning. But in July 2022, standing outside my own meeting room, I didn't know any of this yet. I just knew that something was wrong, that the woman who'd married my son wasn't who she pretended to be, that my name was being systematically erased from a business I'd built with my dead husband's hands. I just didn't know it was theft, calculated, premeditated, long-term theft. I picked up my needle and went back to work on Sophie's dress, the one that would be destroyed in 5 months, the one that would become evidence in a trial I didn't yet know was coming. My son thought he had found love. What he had found was a business plan disguised as a girlfriend, a marriage proposal that was really a hostile takeover, a family that was actually a target. And I had been the asset all along. It took me 3 weeks to recognize the pattern in Zinnia's questions and another week to understand what the pattern meant. September 2022, 2 months before the scissors. The studio had settled into a rhythm that looked like success, featured in magazines booked through spring-generating revenue that should have made me proud. Zinnia started asking questions, not all at once. Just small inquiries dropped into conversation like stones into still water. Beatrice, just curious, the Pearl District lease is that month-to-month or annual renewal. I was pinning a hem. Didn't look up. Annual. Renews in March. And it's under the business name, right? Just my name. Personal lease. She made a small sound like she was filing that away. 3 days later, do you keep business accounts at that credit union Edmund used, or did you modernize? A week after that, loud enough for me to hear, Mom's probably got everything in some complicated trust, right? That's what old people do. Nolan shrugged. I don't know. We don't really talk about that stuff. Maybe you should. Estate planning is important. The questions continued. Which bank? What accounts? When did the lease expire? Were retirement funds in a trust or personal name? Had I considered selling the residential property behind the shop? Each question by itself seemed reasonable. Together they formed a map. These questions aren't casual, Nolan, I said one evening. She's mapping something. He looked at me like I was paranoid. She's trying to help Mom. She needs to understand the business structure. She's interrogating me. You're being dramatic. Maybe I was. Maybe being erased from my own story had made me see threats where there was only curiosity. Then Mira heard the phone call. Late September. Thursday evening. I'd left at 6. Mira stayed late organizing fabric deliveries. She was in the storage room when she heard Zinnia's voice carry through the office door. We just need her signature. Once we have that, the rest is easy. Mira froze, held her breath. No, he doesn't know, and she definitely doesn't. She still thinks this is about family legacy. Zinnia laughed. She'll sign because she trusts him. That's the beautiful part. Mira's phone was in her pocket. She texted me, "Beatrice, I heard something tonight. You need to know what Zinnia said when she thought no one was listening." I called her at 10. She recounted every word. I had spent 2 years telling myself I was imagining things, seeing shadows where there was only my son's happiness. But shadows don't say, "We just need her signature," when they think no one's listening. "She called you the old woman," Mira whispered, "like you were an obstacle, not a person." That night I couldn't sleep. At midnight I went to my home office. The filing cabinet in the corner had been locked since Edmund's funeral. I kept the key on my house key ring, a habit so old I'd stopped noticing it. I unlocked the cabinet. 40 years of documents. Original Langford Stitch House deed from 1982. Pearl District lease my name only. Business licenses. Bank account signature cards. Trademark registration. Retirement account statements showing 38 years of saving. My name. Every single document. She didn't know that yet. Neither did Nolan. I spread everything across the kitchen table and started my old home scanner, the one Edmund bought in 2005. Slow and loud, but still functional. It took until 3 a.m. to copy everything. 3 complete sets. One set went back in the filing cabinet. One set went into an envelope for Eleanor with instructions to keep it somewhere safe and never tell anyone. And one set went into a manila envelope addressed to Graham Sterling, attorney at law. I made 3 copies of every document that night. One I kept in the house, one I gave to Eleanor, and one I mailed to an address I had been carrying in my wallet for 20 years, waiting for the day I'd need the promise it represented. Graham Sterling. His father had ordered a wedding suit from Edmund in 2002, became a friend. When Edmund died, Graham came to the funeral wearing that suit, 20 years old and still perfect. He'd pulled me aside after the service. "B," he'd said, pressing his business card into my hand, "if you ever need help anything at all, you call me. My father loved your husband. You understand." I'd kept that card in my wallet for 3 years behind my driver's license. Now I was using it. The post office clerk looked at the thick envelope. "Ma'am, that's a lot of documents. You want insurance on this?" "Yes. Insured for replacement value, though what's inside can't actually be replaced." I wrote a note on our old stationery. "Graham, something's wrong. I may need your help. Keep these safe. Beatrice." I mailed it from the post office, not from the studio, paid extra for tracking, watched the clerk stamp it, and toss it in the outgoing bin. The envelope was thick with 40 years of proof that I owned everything Zinnia wanted to steal. I mailed it to the office of the man who had once told Edmund, "If you ever need me, I'll be there." I hadn't told him everything yet, but somehow I knew he'd already be waiting. I didn't sleep the night the scissors shattered, and by 7 the next morning, I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. The business card sat on my kitchen table where I'd placed it at 6 a.m. after giving up on sleep entirely. Graham Sterling, attorney at law. The edges were worn soft from 3 years in my wallet. The ink slightly faded but still legible. I'd carried it since Edmund's funeral, a promise folded behind my driver's license, waiting for a moment I'd hoped would never come. That moment was now. I made coffee I didn't drink, watched the kitchen clock count minutes, rehearsed what I would say. My son threw away his father's scissors in front of 40 people. My daughter-in-law is trying to steal my business. I think I'm in danger. The words sounded paranoid even in my head. Dramatic. The kind of thing that made adult children suggest assisted living. But Mira's voice echoed in my memory. "We just need her signature. Once we have that, the rest is easy." At 7:15 a.m. I dialed. The phone rang once, twice. "Graham Sterling's office. This is Graham." His voice was exactly as I remembered from the funeral, steady, warm, professional, in a way that made you trust it immediately. "Graham, this is B." He said it before I could finish. "I've been waiting for your call." My throat tightened. Are you safe right now?" 4 words that told me he understood exactly how dangerous this had become. "I'm home, alone. They don't know I'm calling." "Good." I heard papers rustling. "I received your package 3 weeks ago. I've read everything twice. We need to meet tomorrow if you can. There's a lot we need to discuss, and not all of it should be said over the phone. I gripped the phone tighter. What did you find? Nothing I didn't expect once I started looking. He paused. B, I need you to understand something. When you sent me those documents, I didn't just read them. I researched. Public records, business filings, property history. And what I found, it's both worse and better than you think. I don't understand. You will. Tomorrow. Can you come to my office at 10? Yes. Don't tell anyone you're meeting me, not your son, not his wife, not even friends at the studio. Can you do that? Yes. Bring any additional documentation you have, especially anything from the past 6 months, emails, texts, recorded conversations, anything that shows their intentions. Recorded conversations, the security camera, the one still blinking its red light in the studio recording everything. There's video, I said. From last night. The studio has security cameras. From last night. His voice sharpened. What happened last night? And I told him. About the collection launch party. About presenting the scissors. About Nolan throwing them in the trash while 40 witnesses watched. About Zinnia's voice calling 42 years of Edmund's work worthless trash. Silence on the other end, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Graham. I'm here. His voice had changed, harder, angrier. B, that video is evidence. Don't touch it. Don't mention it to anyone. When you come tomorrow, bring me the access information for your security system. We'll need that footage preserved. Evidence for what? For when we stop them. 3 years Edmund had been gone, and I was finally cashing in the promise his friend had made at the funeral. The promise that someone somewhere would help me when I needed it most. My father ordered his wedding suit from your husband 20 years ago, Graham said quietly. Did you know that? Edmund mentioned it. That suit lasted longer than my father's marriage. He wore it to my college graduation, to my wedding, to every important moment, until he died 5 years ago. Graham's voice carried weight I hadn't heard before. At his funeral, I wore it, and I remembered what he'd told me. Edmund Langford is a man you repay. He makes things that last. He keeps his word. If his family ever needs help, you give it. Graham, I'm not doing you a favor, B. I'm paying a debt, and after reading what you sent me, I'm realizing that debt is bigger than I thought. What do you mean? Tomorrow, when I can show you everything at once. But I'll tell you this much now, every single document you sent me has your name on it. Not your son's. Not a corporation. Not a trust. Your name. Do you understand what that means? That I still own it. That you always owned it. And they have been planning to take it from you since before your son got married. The kitchen felt too small suddenly. Too quiet. The morning light through the window seemed wrong somehow, like the world outside couldn't possibly be the same world where my son's wife had been plotting to steal my life's work for 2 years. How long have you known? I asked. Since I opened your package. The pattern was obvious once I laid everything out. Your documents show ownership. But her behavior, the questions Mira reported, the timing of events, shows intent. And intent is what we'll use to stop her. How? Tomorrow B, 10 a.m. downtown 3rd floor. Park in the garage underneath. Don't park on the street where someone might see your car. You think they're watching me? I think they're close to making their move, and we need to be ready before they do. He gave me the address, made me repeat it back, confirmed I could get there safely. One more thing, he said before hanging up. From this point forward, you're not just a woman whose son threw away some scissors. You're a client with assets worth protecting and evidence of potential fraud. Act accordingly. Be careful. Be smart. And be... Yes, you did the right thing by calling me. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen holding a phone that still felt warm from my grip, staring at Edmund's picture on the wall. The one from our wedding day, both of us so young and hopeful and certain that hard work and honest hands would be enough to build a life. Graham had read 40 years of documents and immediately understood what Zinnia was planning. I hadn't told him everything yet, not the full story of the scissors, not about the years of being erased, not about the moment I'd realized my son chose his wife over his mother. But somehow he already knew enough to wait. Tomorrow, I would learn just how much power I'd been sitting on all along. The documents spread across Graham's conference table looked like 40 years of my life laid out for autopsy, except I was still breathing, and suddenly that mattered more than I'd realized. I'd parked in the garage as instructed, taken the elevator to the 3rd floor. Now I stood in a conference room that smelled like leather and old paper, staring at evidence of my own existence arranged in neat piles. Graham stood at the head of the table wearing the kind of suit his father would have approved of. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, B. This is going to take a while." He picked up the first document. Pearl District Lease, signed February 2021. Look at the signature line. My signature. My name. Beatrice Langford Lessy. Business license. He slid it toward me. Issued 1982, renewed annually. Owner. Beatrice Langford, I read aloud. Trademark registration for Langford Bridal. Another document. Holder. My name again. Investment accounts. Social security number on file. He need. Mine. And this. He placed a faded document in the center. Original Langford Stitch House deed. Purchase 1982. Never transferred. Sole owner as of Edmund's death. I stared at my name over and over on every single page. Barney B, look at this signature line. And this one. And this. Whose name do you see? Mine. They're all mine, but Nolan and Zinnia run everything. No. Graham's voice was firm. They operate the business under your authority, but they don't own it. They never did. Your son has been running a studio he doesn't legally control, and Zinnia knows it. He pulled out one more document. Power of attorney for trial operations. Signed October 2021. Look at the language. Limited authorization for operational decisions. Not ownership transfer. Not equity stake. Just permission to run things while you still owned them. My hands were shaking. I thought I gave him the business. You gave him responsibility, not rights. There's a difference. All this time, they had been trying to take something that was never theirs to begin with, and all this time I had held the deed in my own hands without knowing how to use it. Why didn't Zinnia know this? I asked. Oh, she knew. That's why she needed your signature. She was trying to figure out how to get you to sign away what you owned because she couldn't take it any other way. He opened a different folder, which brings us to this. The document he placed before me had a medical practice letterhead I didn't recognize. Dr. Marcus Finn, private physician, dated October 2022. Dr. Marcus Finn was a private physician who accepted $3,500 to write a medical report about a patient he'd never examined. I started reading, Patient Beatrice Langford, age 68, presenting concerns, mild cognitive decline difficulty with financial decisions susceptible to confusion. Recommendation: family should consider supportive measures to protect patient from financial self-harm. The words blurred. Cognitive decline, confusion, financial self-harm. This doctor examined me. I looked up at Graham. I've never met anyone named Marcus Finn. He never examined you. He wrote this based on Zinnia's descriptions. Graham slid another paper across. She paid him $3,500. A check, Zinnia's signature, memo line consultation fee. For this, he placed a third document on top. Guardianship petition, draft form. Petitioner, Nolan Langford. Subject, Beatrice Langford. Legal grounds, cognitive impairment. Requested authority, full financial guardianship, including right to execute contracts, sell property, and manage assets. The room felt too cold suddenly. They wanted to make me legally incompetent. Yes. So I couldn't fight back. Yes. So Nolan could sign everything over and I couldn't stop him because the court said I wasn't capable. Exactly. Once guardianship was granted, they'd have 6 months to liquidate everything before you could even appeal. By then, the money would be gone, the studio sold your name, removed from every document. I had spent 68 years building a reputation as a careful, skilled craftswoman, and Zinnia was going to erase it with one doctor's signature and the word incompetent. She was going to make me invisible, I said slowly. First from my studio by erasing my work, then from my own mind by claiming I couldn't think straight. If everyone believed I was confused, anything I said about theft would sound like paranoid rambling. Yes, and Nolan would sign the papers thinking he was protecting me. Probably. He'd believe he was doing the right thing. Zinnia would convince him it was kindness. I picked up the medical report, read it again. Difficulty with financial decisions. Susceptible to confusion. I thought about Zinnia's questions, the way she'd studied me, the casual inquiries about memory and confusion. She'd been building a case, creating a narrative, preparing witnesses to testify that yes, Beatrice did seem forgetful, did seem overwhelmed, did seem like someone who needed help. And once the court agreed, I would lose everything not through theft, but through protection. When were they planning to file this? I asked. Soon. The petition is drafted but not submitted. My guess is they were waiting for one more thing. What? For you to do something that looked unstable. Something that made their case stronger. The scissors, the party, 40 witnesses watching my son throw away Edmund's legacy while I stood there silent. If I'd made a scene, they would have had their proof. But I'd walked out quietly, and Zinnia's plan had to wait. They wanted to make me invisible in 2 ways, I said. First from my studio through erasure, then from my own mind through guardianship. One would strip my credit, the other would strip my rights. And if they'd succeeded, I would have signed everything away thinking it was for my own protection. Graham nodded slowly. But they didn't succeed. Because you sent me those documents. Because you recognize the pattern. And because you're sitting here right now fully competent and legally in control of everything they want to steal. He gathered the papers into a neat stack. Now we stop them. The bank advisor looked at me over her reading glasses and asked 3 times if I was absolutely certain, as if freezing my own business accounts required more permission than opening them had. December 2022, 1 week after Graham showed me the documents, 1 week after I learned about the guardianship scheme. Patricia Mansfield, a 54-year-old senior financial advisor who had worked at this bank for 26 years, knew complicated family situations when she saw them. She'd arranged the private office and listened while Graham explained over speakerphone. Mrs. Langford wants to freeze all business accounts, Graham said. Revoke all authorized users. She's the sole legal owner, correct? Patricia scrolled through her screen. Yes, Beatrice Langford opened these accounts in 1982. Nolan Langford added as authorized user October 2021. Not joint owner. No, just authorized to conduct transactions. Then she has every right to revoke that authorization. Patricia looked at me. Mrs. Langford, once I process this, all authorized users lose access immediately. Cards will be declined. Online access blocked. You're certain? I'm certain. My name is on every account. I'm simply reclaiming what was always mine. I signed the forms. My hand was steady. Patricia's keyboard clicked efficiently. This will take effect within the hour. Any attempt to access funds will trigger an alert to both you and Mr. Sterling. Perfect, Graham said. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Mom, what did you do? Nolan's voice was high-panicked. My cards aren't working. The system is locked. Suppliers are calling their payments bounced. What did you do? I stood in my kitchen phone pressed to my ear. I protected what's mine, son. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then came a sound I had never heard from my son before, something between a scream and a sob. And behind it, I could hear her voice. Stay calm, we'll fix this. You can't, Mom, that's my business, my reputation. Your business checked the documents, Nolan. Every account, every lease whose name is on them. Another silence. This is insane. You're being careful with the next word, I warned. Think very carefully about what you're about to call me. The line went dead. The next morning at 10, Nolan's car pulled into my driveway. He came alone. No Zinnia at his side, no carefully coached responses. Just my son walking up to my door with his shoulders hunched and his jaw tight. I let him in. He paced my living room, angry, afraid. You have to reverse this, he said. The studio is dead in the water. I can't pay staff. I can't order supplies. You're destroying everything we built. Everything we built. I stayed by the doorway. In the 2 years since you opened that studio, how many times did you mention my name in interviews? He stopped pacing. What? How many times did you tell clients about the woman who actually sewed their dresses? This isn't about credit. You threw your grandfather's scissors in the trash in front of 40 people. Your wife said, bless her heart, like I was charity, and you stood there and let her. She didn't mean. When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Nolan stopped. What? Not about money, not about business, about me. When was the last time you asked how I was doing? He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing came out. It's a simple question, Nolan. Mom, this isn't about... He looked at the floor, looked at the ceiling, looked anywhere but at me. 30 seconds. That's how long he stood there trying to remember a single moment when he'd cared about me instead of what I could give him. I can't remember, he finally whispered. I can't remember the last time I asked. The admission hung in the air. That's why I froze the accounts, I said quietly. Not to punish you, to wake you up. Mom, your wife is trying to have me declared incompetent. Did you know that? His face went white. What? She paid a doctor to write a fake medical report, filed draft guardianship papers. The plan was to get control of my finances, liquidate everything, and make sure I couldn't fight back. No, she wouldn't. I have the documents, Nolan. I have the check she wrote. I have the petition with your name on it as petitioner. He shook his head slowly. She said she told me you were confused, that you needed help, that we were protecting you. From what? From making bad decisions. From people taking advantage. He stopped, heard what he was saying. Oh, God. She was going to steal everything, Nolan, and she was going to make you the instrument of that theft, thinking you were being a good son. He sat down heavily on my couch, put his head in his hands. I wanted to go to him, wanted to put my hand on his shoulder the way I had when he was young, but I stayed where I was. What do I do? He asked finally. I don't know. That's not my decision anymore. He looked up. Mom, you have to decide who you are, Nolan, and you have to decide if the person you've become is someone you can live with. He stood slowly, walked to the door, turned back once mouth open like he wanted to say something, but nothing came. He left without answering, and I understood then that I hadn't lost my son to cruelty or greed. I had lost him to someone who knew exactly how to use his weakness against both of us. The first call came 3 days after I froze the accounts, Victoria Hayes asking in that carefully neutral tone people use when they're testing whether you've actually lost your mind. Beatrice, I need to ask, are you okay? Someone mentioned you've been under stress, and I just wanted to check in. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, measuring my words. Who told you I was under stress, Victoria? A pause. I don't want to make this uncomfortable, but people are concerned about your well-being, about whether you're being properly supported. Was it Zinnia? Another pause, longer this time. I really shouldn't. It was Zinnia. Victoria sighed. She called yesterday, said you'd been having difficulties, that the family was worried, that if I noticed anything unusual in our interactions, I should reach out to your son. I gripped the phone tighter. And what did she say was wrong with me? She didn't use specific terms, just suggested you've been overwhelmed, making impulsive decisions. She was very sympathetic, said you'd worked so hard for so long that burnout was natural at your age. At my age, like 68 was a disease. Victoria, I'm going to tell you something and you can decide whether to believe me. My daughter-in-law is trying to steal my business. She paid a doctor to write a fake medical report claiming I'm incompetent. The accounts I froze are legally mine. They've always been mine. And now she's trying to convince my clients I'm unstable so they'll leave before she does. Silence on the other end. I understand this sounds paranoid, I continued. But I have documentation. I have an attorney. And I'm documenting every call like this one. Oh, Victoria said softly. Oh, B, I'm so sorry. Did she ask you to cancel your commission? No, she made it sound like you needed help. I do need help. I need my clients to know I'm still the same seamstress who's been serving them for 40 years. Victoria was quiet for a moment. I believe you. But 3 other clients didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, they called with the same careful concern. the same vague references to hearing things. One, a bride whose mother had worn my work 30 years ago, canceled a $12,000 commission. "I'm sorry, Beatrice. I just think with everything going on, it might be better to work with someone who's in a more stable situation." Mira found the evidence on January 5th. She was reorganizing client files when she noticed the dates on Zinnia's phone activity. Our internal system logged every time someone accessed client information. Zinnia had opened the master contact list on November 20th, 3 weeks before I froze the accounts. She took photos of the entire client list with her phone. Mira said, showing me the timestamp. I saw the screen reflection in the office window camera. She was preparing to steal everyone before you even froze the accounts. 40 years of work, and it was being dismantled one suspicious phone call at a time, one whispered rumor at a time. But Graham had warned me this would happen, and we were documenting every single call. "She's building a new client base before she launches whatever she's planning next," Mira said. "Telling them you're unstable now, so when she opens a competing studio, they'll follow her instead of you." I stared at the photos Mira had printed. My client list, names and numbers I'd collected over decades, relationships I'd built one careful stitch at a time. "She's not just stealing my business," I said quietly. "She's stealing my reputation." What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until much later, was that while Zinnia was destroying my reputation, someone else was preparing to destroy the physical space where I'd built it. I pieced this together later from Ryder's own testimony at trial and from what Nolan eventually told his attorney. January 18th, 6:30 p.m., a dive bar on 82nd Avenue, the kind with sticky floors and bartenders who don't ask questions. Nolan sat alone in a corner booth nursing his fourth whiskey, penniless, locked out of the studio, Zinnia barely speaking to him except to remind him whose fault this was. Ryder Knox, a 37-year-old drifter with a pattern of turning other people's problems into everyone's disasters, bought my son another round and started talking about justice. "She can't do this to you, man." Ryder slid into the booth across from Nolan. "She's your mother. What kind of mother destroys her own son's life?" Nolan drained his glass. "She says I didn't care about her, that I only cared about what she could give me. That's bullshit. You built that business. You made it successful. And now she's taking credit. Not taking credit, taking everything. The accounts are frozen, the studio's locked. I can't pay rent, I can't even buy groceries." Ryder signaled for another round. "You tried talking to her." "Yeah, it didn't work." "Then maybe talking isn't the answer." Ryder leaned forward. "If she won't give it back, you make her scared enough to give it back. Show her you're serious." Nolan's eyes were unfocused. "How? I know people who can help. We go there tonight. Make some noise. Break some shit. Nothing crazy, just enough that she understands this isn't a game." "I don't know." "You need 6 guys total for this to work. Enough that she understands you're serious. I'll call them right now." Nolan stared at his empty glass. Thought about Zinnia's cold silence. Thought about his mother's calm voice saying, "I protected what's mine, son." Thought about sleeping on a friend's couch at 45 years old. "Okay," he said. Ryder pulled out his phone and started texting. 5 names, 5 quick calls, 5 agreements. "Done," Ryder said, grinning. "We meet here at 11, then we go teach your mom a lesson about family loyalty." 6 men. That's how many Ryder called that night 6 men who had never met Edmund, who had never seen my hands bleed over a sewing needle, who were about to destroy 40 years in one night. I didn't know any of this yet. Not about the bar. Not about Ryder's calls. Not about the 6 men heading to my shop with alcohol and rage coursing through them. But somewhere in the dark, my son was making a choice that would destroy the last bridge between us. And I was home alone working on Eleanor's wedding dress, completely unaware that midnight was coming. The sound of breaking glass at 11:30 on a Tuesday night is the kind of sound that ends one life and begins another. I was in my home workshop hand-stitching the hem on Eleanor's wedding dress. The ivory silk caught the lamplight like water, each stitch a small prayer that her granddaughter's marriage would last longer than the fabric. I'd been working on this dress every evening for 3 months, a gift, a rebellion, a reminder that some things still mattered more than money. Then the crash. Glass shattering, multiple windows, the unmistakable sound of violence. I dropped the needle and ran. My shop was attached to my house. Edmund had designed it that way in 1982, so I could work late without leaving home. Now I ran through the connecting hallway in my nightgown and slippers, hands shaking, phone forgotten on the sewing table behind me. The shop front was chaos. 6 men, drunk and angry, destroying 40 years in real time. Windows already shattered, display cases overturned, sewing tables thrown on their sides. The vintage Singer machine Edmund bought me for our 10th anniversary smashed on the floor, gears scattered like teeth. I stood frozen in the doorway. "This is what you deserve." Nolan's voice slurred and furious. "You destroyed my life, now I destroy yours." He swung a baseball bat at the mirror wall, the one Edmund installed, so brides could see themselves from every angle. 7 feet of glass exploding into silver rain. Ryder Knox laughed, pulling dresses off their hangers, throwing them into the chaos. White silk, cream lace, champagne tulle, wedding dresses I'd spent months creating, each one a story. Each one someone's most important day. "Nolan, stop, please, stop." He didn't hear me. Or he did, and it didn't matter. 2 other men overturned the fabric storage bolts of silk and satin rolling across the floor, trampled under boots. One grabbed my scissors, the everyday ones, not Edmund's silver pair, and started cutting. Random violence. Destruction, for its own sake. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, just stood there watching my son tear apart everything his father and I had built. 40 years. 40 years of Edmund's hands and mine building something beautiful stitch by stitch, and my son was tearing it apart in 40 seconds. Then Nolan stumbled through the wreckage and stopped. In the corner, hanging on the only rack still standing, was Eleanor's wedding dress, the one I'd been working on. 3 months of evening hours, ivory silk with French seams, hand-embroidered lace at the collar, a labor of love for a woman who'd held my hand through Edmund's funeral. Nolan walked toward it. "No," I whispered. "Not that one." He grabbed the dress off the hanger. "Nolan, that's Eleanor's. That's for her granddaughter." He looked at me. His eyes were wrong, empty and furious at once. Then he tore it. The sound of silk ripping is surprisingly loud. A violent sound, a final sound. He ripped the dress in half, then quarters, throwing pieces across the shop like confetti. The collar I'd spent 2 weeks perfecting. The hem I'd been finishing an hour ago. The tiny buttons I'd sewn by hand, each one a small act of patience. Gone. Across the street, a light turned on. Eleanor Hartley stood at her second-floor window in her bathrobe. 63 years old. My friend, my neighbor. The woman whose granddaughter would never wear that dress now. She looked down at the chaos, at the broken glass, at the men destroying my shop, at Nolan. I saw her face change, saw recognition hit. She'd known him since he was a boy, taught him to measure fabric when he was 8 years old, patient and kind the way she'd been with her own children. Watched him grow up in this shop, learning craft from his parents. Now she watched him destroy it. Eleanor pulled out her phone. Sirens came 6 minutes later, though it felt like hours. Detective Paul Crane, 48, and built like someone who spent his weekends hiking Powell Butte, arrived with 2 patrol cars and the kind of calm authority that stops violence in its tracks. Portland police step away from the building, hands where I can see them. 4 of the men ran, scattered into the January darkness like rats. Nolan Ryder and 1 other were too drunk to run. They stood in the wreckage, swaying, suddenly aware of what they'd done. Eleanor had held Nolan as a baby, taught him to measure fabric when he was 8, and now she stood at her window with a phone watching him destroy everything while calling the police on him. "Ma'am, are you the owner?" Detective Crane stepped toward me carefully like I might shatter like the mirrors behind him. I nodded, couldn't speak yet. "Anyone hurt?" I shook my head. "Can you identify these men?" I looked at my son, handcuffs already on his wrists. Face slack with alcohol and something that might have been regret or might have been just the shock of consequences arriving. "The one in the middle," I said. My voice sounded wrong, distant. "That's my son." Detective Reeves' expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The one on the left, Ryder Knox, I don't know his address. I don't know the third one. We'll need a full statement and photos of the damage. Can you do that now, or would you prefer morning? I looked at the shop. At 40 years of work destroyed, at Eleanor's wedding dress in pieces on the floor. Morning, I whispered. They led the three men toward the patrol cars. Nolan stumbled, nearly fell. An officer caught him. As they put the handcuffs on my son, he looked up at Eleanor's window at the light that had turned on at the phone, still in her hand, at the woman who had known him since he was a boy learning to thread needles at my kitchen table. And I think in that moment even he understood that some things once broken cannot be fixed with an apology. I stood in what was left of my life's work and felt something I'd never felt toward my son before. Not anger, not grief, but the cold clarity that comes when you finally stop making excuses for someone. The patrol cars had taken him away. The sirens faded. And now it was just me, Detective Reeves and Eleanor, standing in 40 years of destruction. Glass crunched under my slippers. Every step revealed new damage. The vintage Singer Edmund bought me for our 10th anniversary cracked housing, scattered gears. Display cases overturned their contents, trampled. Wedding dresses that had taken months to create torn and dirtied beyond repair. The mirror wall I used to watch brides see themselves transformed 7 feet of shattered reflection. And in the corner on the floor where Nolan had thrown it, Eleanor's wedding dress. Ivory silk in pieces, French seams torn apart, hand-embroidered collar destroyed. 3 months of evening work meant as a gift reduced to rags. "Ma'am," Detective Crane said quietly, "I need to ask, do you want to press charges against your son?" Eleanor's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezed. I looked at the torn dress, remembered Edmund's voice from decades ago teaching me that every cut must be intentional, that you don't just destroy fabric, you destroy someone's hope, someone's joy, someone's most important day. Nolan had destroyed this intentionally. "Every charge, Detective," I said. My voice was steady. "All of them. Property damage, vandalism, breaking and entering, terroristic threats, whatever applies. I want a full report." Reeves wrote in his notebook. Didn't look surprised. "Your son will likely be released within 48 hours with conditions. There'll be a restraining order hearing." "I understand." "And you're certain sometimes family situations. He needs to learn that actions have consequences." I looked at the detective. For 45 years, I made excuses for him, explained away his selfishness as ambition, overlooked his cruelty as stress. That ends tonight. Eleanor squeezed my hand again. When I looked at her, she was crying. "Beatrice, that dress, I'm so sorry he destroyed it. My granddaughter, I'll make you a new one, Eleanor, even more beautiful than the first." "How can you after all this?" "Because he destroyed the dress, not the skill. He destroyed my shop, not my hands." I picked up a piece of torn silk. The fabric was still good underneath the dirt, still salvageable. "And he definitely didn't destroy the promise I made to you." Eleanor squeezed my hand as I said the words, and I felt something shift inside me, not from mother to monster, but from enabler to someone who finally understood that love without accountability isn't love at all. Detective Crane finished his notes. "I'll have the full report ready by morning. The prosecutor will contact you about testimony." "Thank you." He left through the broken front door. Eleanor stayed. "You should go home," I said. "It's almost 1 a.m. "So should you. You're not staying here tonight, are you?" I looked around. Glass everywhere. No working locks, no security until I could get the windows boarded. "No, I'll call someone in the morning." "Stay with me tonight," Eleanor offered. "The guest room is ready." "Thank you, I will." We walked out together, Eleanor supporting me across the glass-strewn floor. The night air was cold. January in Portland, the kind of cold that makes everything ache. Eleanor locked her door behind us, made tea, neither of us drank, and insisted I take the guest room. I sat on the bed still in my nightgown and slippers and stared at nothing. My phone rang at 12:52 a.m. Mira's name on the screen. "B, where are you?" "Are you okay? I just drove past your house and—" "I'm at Eleanor's. What's wrong?" "Zinnia was at your house, just now. I saw her car in your driveway, lights on inside. I took a photo, the timestamp is 12:47. She was there while Nolan was being arrested." I sat up straighter. What? I was driving home from Sarah's place, took the route past your street. Saw lights on. Not the porch light, the inside lights. Like someone was searching. Then I saw her car. I recognized the license plate. Took a photo and called you immediately. Is she still there? No. I think she heard my car or your phone ringing because the lights went out and she came out the back door. Ran to her car and drove off before I could be. Why was she at your house instead of the police station? I knew why. The documents, the deeds, the account information, everything Graham and I had carefully copied and stored. She was looking for documents, I said. Evidence. Anything she could use or destroy. Oh my God. Send me that photo. And Mira, thank you. That photograph might be the most important thing you've ever done for me. She sent it 30 seconds later. Zinnia's car in my driveway. License plate visible. Timestamp 12:47 a.m. While her husband sat in jail arrested for destroying my shop at her instigation, she'd been breaking into my home looking for documents to complete the theft he'd failed to accomplish with violence. She hadn't even tried to bail him out. My son was in handcuffs at the police station. His wife was in my house searching through my papers with a flashlight. That photo timestamp 12:47 a.m. would later become one of the most important pieces of evidence Graham ever used. I forwarded the photo to Graham with a message, Zinnia broke into my house tonight during Nolan's arrest. Mira caught her on camera. Timestamp proves she prioritized documents over her husband. He responded immediately, even at 1 a.m. Don't go back to the house alone. I'll meet you there tomorrow at 9 a.m. with a locksmith and security company. And B, this is exactly what we needed. She just proved everything. I set down the phone and stared at the photo again. Zinnia's car. My driveway. The timestamp that would prove to a jury exactly who the mastermind was and exactly how little she cared about the man she'd used as her door. In the morning, I would discover what documents she'd taken. I would board up the windows and change the locks and begin the long process of rebuilding what my son had destroyed. But tonight I sat in Eleanor's guest room and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. My son had made his choice. His wife had revealed hers. And I had finally completely stopped making excuses for either of them. 48 hours in a holding cell teaches you who actually cares about you. My son learned that lesson when his wife never came. January 21st, 2 days after the vandalism. Nolan walked out of the police station processing room looking like someone who'd aged 10 years in 48 hours. Unshaven, clothes wrinkled, eyes hollow. I wasn't there. I learned about it later from Detective Reeves, who'd called to update me on the charges. But Mira had driven past at exactly the right time. Saw Nolan standing alone on the sidewalk, no car waiting, no wife. Just a man holding a paper bag of his personal effects like it was the only thing he had left. The court-appointed public defender, a tired woman in her 30s, who'd seen this story 100 times, had explained the conditions of his release. "Your wife hasn't contacted us, Mr. Langford," she'd said not unkindly. "No bail posted, no attorney retained. You're being released on your own recognizance with conditions." Nolan pulled out his phone, checked it for the first time in 2 days. 0 missed calls from Zinnia. One text message sent 10 hours after his arrest. "Handle it yourself. I'm dealing with the business side." 10 hours. She'd waited 10 hours to tell him she wasn't coming. Hadn't even pretended to care. Detective Crane slid a document across the table. "You need to sign this before you leave. Restraining order. 200 yards minimum distance from Beatrice Langford. Victim." That word was typed right there next to my name. Victim Beatrice Langford. Perpetrator Nolan Langford. Nolan stared at it. His hand trembled when he picked up the pen. "This means you cannot go within 200 yards of your mother's residence or place of business," Reeves explained. "Any violation results in immediate arrest. No warnings." "I understand. You cannot contact her directly or through third parties. No calls, texts, emails, letters, nothing. I understand. Do you have somewhere to stay? Someone who can pick you up?" Nolan looked at his phone again, at the single text from his wife, at the words, "Handle it yourself," that meant she'd already moved on to whatever came next. "I'll figure it out," he said. He signed his name below mine, below the word victim. And somewhere in that moment, I think he finally understood what it felt like to be alone in a room, needing someone who wasn't there. Before I reveal who Zinnia targeted next, comment A, if you think Nolan will finally see through her, or B, if he'll stay loyal. Add one reason in 5 to 10 words. Note the next part includes fictionalized details for emotional impact, but the lesson is what I hope stays with you. 2 days earlier, while Nolan sat in that holding cell thinking his wife would come, Zinnia was in a cafe in Northeast Portland recruiting her next piece. Tessa Wren was 27, fresh from a bankruptcy that left her vulnerable to anyone offering cash and false promises, and Zinnia was offering exactly that. The cafe was nearly empty at 9 p.m., just Zinnia in a corner booth wearing casual clothes instead of her usual designer outfits, looking approachable, sympathetic, safe. Tessa arrived 10 minutes late, nervous. "Thank you for meeting me," Zinnia said, gesturing to the seat across from her. "I know this is unusual. You said it was about work. In a way." Zinnia slid a folder across the table. "I've been reviewing the studio finances. Did you know Beatrice pays you $12 less per hour than market rate for your position?" Tessa's face tightened. I knew it wasn't much. It's exploitation. You do marketing, client coordination, social media management work that normally pays $50,000 a year. She's paying you $32. The studio is small. The studio made $400,000 last year. She can afford to pay you properly. She chooses not to. Tessa looked down at her hands. "I need the job. After the bankruptcy, nobody else would hire me." "I know." Zinnia's voice was warm, understanding. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. I'm starting something new, a fresh studio, better management, fair compensation. And I need someone who knows the business from the inside." "I don't understand." "I need the client database, design files, supplier contracts, information that's technically Beatrice's, but that you helped build. Copy everything to a USB drive, bring it to me, and I'll pay you $23,000. 15 in cash, 8 to clear your remaining bankruptcy debt." Tessa stared. That's stealing. "Is it you've done all the real work? Beatrice takes the credit while you drown in debt she could help with but doesn't. I'm just offering you compensation you're owed." "I could go to jail. For what? Copying files you created, files you have legitimate access to as an employee." Zinnia leaned forward. "Think of it as taking what you're owed. Beatrice exploited you for years. I'm giving you a fresh start." Tessa was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the bankruptcy court letters, the collection calls, the apartment she could barely afford. $23,000. Plus a job at the new studio, real pay, real respect. Zinnia slid an envelope across the table. $5,000 now, good faith payment. The rest when you deliver the data. Tessa picked up the envelope, felt the weight of it, opened it just enough to see the bills inside. $23,000. That's what Zinnia paid to create a witness who would later become the person who destroyed her entire plan. "Okay," Tessa whispered. "I'll do it." Zinnia smiled, small and satisfied. What Tessa didn't see, what she couldn't have known, was that Zinnia had already prepared documents. Legal papers declaring that a rogue employee named Tessa Wren stole proprietary data without authorization and attempted to sell it to competitors. Papers that would make Tessa the criminal and Zinnia the victim. Tessa walked out of that cafe with $5,000 cash and a promise of freedom from debt. What she didn't know was that Zinnia had already prepared documents blaming everything on a rogue employee who stole data without authorization. She didn't know that Zinnia had a plan for her too, one that didn't end with Tessa walking away with clean hands. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope with embossed lettering. "Blackthorn Bridal cordially invites you to our grand opening addressed to one of my oldest clients, forwarded to me with a single word, sorry. February 2023, 1 month after Nolan destroyed my shop, 1 month after Zinnia broke into my house, 1 month after Tessa accepted money to steal my files. And now this. Blackthorn Bridal, 3 blocks from Langford Stitch House. Grand opening scheduled for the last Saturday in February. Mira discovered it online glossy photos on Instagram professional website press release in Portland Monthly. "B, you need to see this," she said, turning her laptop toward me. The website was beautiful, professional, expensive, and the dresses looked disturbingly familiar because they were mine. The Hartley neckline I'd designed for Eleanor's granddaughter, the Morrison sleeve with its particular shoulder gathering, the Davies train attachment I'd spent 2 years perfecting, all displayed as exclusive Blackthorn designs. She'd changed details, different buttons, altered hemlines, modified beading. But the structure, the construction, that was mine. "These are your designs," Mira said quietly, with enough changes that she thinks I can't prove it. "Can you?" "The modifications are cosmetic. Any expert witness would recognize my construction techniques." Mira pulled up the Oregon Secretary of State website, searched Blackthorn Bridal. The results loaded. Blackthorn Bridal, LLC, registered December 15th, 2022. I stared at the date. December 15th, 3 weeks before Nolan's arrest, 3 weeks before the vandalism. She had registered the business name on December 15th, the same week Nolan and I had decorated the Christmas tree together, the same week she'd smiled at me over dinner and called me Mom. While Nolan was sleeping in your guest room at Christmas, Mira said she was already building her exit. I took a screenshot, added it to Graham's evidence folder, proof that everything after the vandalism, the arrests, the destruction had been planned months in advance. My phone rang. Victoria Hayes. "Beatrice, I received an invitation from Blackthorn Bridal. I wanted you to know I'm not attending, and I'm telling everyone else that loyalty matters." "Thank you, Victoria." "Also, I looked at their website. Those are your designs. Anyone with eyes can see it." She thinks minor changes are enough. They're not. When this goes to trial, you're going to bury her. But Zinnia wasn't done. 2 weeks after Blackthorn's opening, my Google business profile started showing 1-star reviews. Owner mentally unstable, avoid at all costs. Mistreated her own son, unprofessional and erratic. Go to Blackthorn Bridal instead, modern professional, none of the family drama. They came in clusters. 5 one day, 3 the next, 7 the day after. I read them late at night, laptop glowing in my dark kitchen, coffee going cold. Each review a small knife cutting into 40 years of reputation. Mira found me there at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. "You're still up. Can't sleep." She sat down, read the screen. Her face hardened. "Screenshot every single one. Send them to Graham." "I am." "The people who really know you know the truth, Beatrice. These are transparent lies. But the people who don't know me, those are the ones she's talking to. And there are more of them." Then we make the truth louder. Portland Monthly ran a puff piece the next week. Local designer starts fresh after family conflict. Zinnia photographed in her new studio talking about difficult family dynamics and the courage to build something independent. The article never mentioned my name, didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. 40 years of work, and it was being dismantled one suspicious phone call at a time, 1-star rating at a time. But we were documenting every single lie, and lies leave trails. I forwarded everything to Graham. The fake reviews, the plagiarized designs, the business registration showing premeditation. He called that evening. "B, I found something in the metadata of those reviews." I sat up straighter. "What?" I ran a technical analysis, timestamps, IP addresses, user account creation dates. Every single review criticizing you came from the same IP address. Meaning they're all fake. Written by the same person, posted through different accounts, and that IP address traces to a residential address in Northwest Portland, Zinnia's address. I closed my eyes. She got sloppy, very sloppy. She used her home internet to post fake reviews across multiple platforms. Didn't even bother masking the IP. It's traceable, documentable, and admissible. What does this mean? It means we can prove coordinated defamation, digital harassment, intentional destruction of business reputation, combined with the stolen designs, the premeditated business registration, and the data theft through Tessa. We're building something substantial. I stared at my laptop screen, at the 1-star reviews that had felt like daggers, at the words mentally unstable that had kept me awake. She thought she was destroying me online, I said slowly. What she was actually doing was building your case, one traceable lie at a time. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close. Zinnia had been so careful in so many ways, researching my assets years in advance, manipulating Nolan slowly, setting up Tessa as a scapegoat, registering her business weeks before the confrontation. But in her rush to destroy my reputation, she'd left digital fingerprints everywhere. And Graham was right. Lies leave trails. Even careful liars eventually get sloppy. She was about to get even sloppier. Digital fingerprints are harder to erase than physical ones, a fact Zinnia learned too late when Graham spread 3 months of metadata across his conference table like a prosecutor's dream. March 2023, 2 months after the vandalism, 3 weeks after Graham discovered the IP addresses. I sat in his office while he and Detective Crane laid out everything they'd found, documents covering the table, evidence in neat stacks. Let's start with the reviews, Graham said. Every fake review came from the same IP address Zinnia's home router in Northwest Portland. She didn't use a VPN, Reeves added, just sat at home and posted them. How many total liar, I asked? 43, all between February 15th and March 10th. Graham slid another stack toward me. Now the designs, this is where it gets interesting. Printouts from the Blackthorn website, the dresses that were mine. Every file she uploaded contains embedded metadata, Graham explained. Creation date, author name, modification history, digital fingerprints inside the file itself. He pointed to one image. This dress shows creation date November 2019. Author Beatrice Langford. Last modified January 2023 by user Zeed Voss. I stared at the metadata, my name, the date I'd designed it. Zinnia's user ID showing when she'd stolen it. She changed hems and buttons but didn't know how to strip metadata, Graham said. Every design traces back to you as original creator. Can this be used in court? Absolutely. Digital forensics will testify. It's like finding someone's signature on stolen property. Reeves pulled out another document. Bank records. We subpoenaed Zinnia's accounts. Found a transfer January 19th, $5,000 to Tessa Wren. Timestamp 10:47 p.m. January 19th, the night of the vandalism. Your shop was vandalized at 11:30 p.m., Reeves said. 43 minutes after she paid Tessa. 3 dates. That's all Graham needed to prove she had targeted us from the very beginning. September 2020, when she searched property records. December 2022, when she registered Blackthorn Bridal. January 2023, when she paid Tessa at 10:47 p.m., 43 minutes before my son destroyed my shop. Tessa's resignation came 12 hours later, Graham said. Morning of January 20th, no notice, just gone. Because she'd been paid, I said. Exactly. Zinnia thought she was buying a silent accomplice. What she bought was evidence of bribery and conspiracy. Graham leaned back. She didn't just steal your designs, B. She stole your identity and tried to sell it back to your own customers. How long until we have enough? I asked. We have enough now, Reeves said. But Graham wants to wait. A few more weeks, Graham confirmed. We need everything, not just enough to win, but enough that she can never do this to anyone else. Reeves stood. I'm filing an official surveillance order today. Phone records, financial transactions, digital activity. After he left, I sat with Graham in the quiet. She was so careful in some ways, I said. The property research, the long-term planning. Criminals always get sloppy somewhere, Graham said. The smart ones get caught by one mistake. The arrogant ones by 100. Which one is Zinnia? Both. What I didn't know was that while we sat building the case, Tessa Wren was discovering exactly how thoroughly she'd been betrayed. April 7th, 10:30 p.m. Tessa at her laptop checking email. She clicked on her sent folder by accident, meant to check drafts. But the sent folder didn't show her emails. It showed Zinnia's. Tessa stared at the screen, then remembered Zinnia had used her computer in February. Needed to send an email, her phone was dead. Zinnia's account had auto-saved the login. Now Tessa was looking at 3 months of Zinnia's sent emails. One subject line caught her eye. March 28, 2023, sent to r.morrison@portlandlaw.com. Subject: Employee Theft Defense Strategy. Tessa clicked it. Robert, pair our discussion. Please find attached documentation regarding the data theft incident. The former marketing employee, Tessa Wren, copied proprietary data without authorization. I discovered the theft in March and immediately terminated employment. I am the victim of her criminal actions. Please review the attached police report draft. Attachment: police _report draft _ren.pdf. Tessa's hands started shaking. March 28th. Over a month ago. Zinnia had written this 2 months after paying Tessa. 2 months after Tessa delivered the data Zinnia requested. She clicked the attachment. Police report, pre-written, naming Tessa as perpetrator, Zinnia as victim. Every detail crafted to make it look like Tessa acted alone. No mention of the payment. No mention of Zinnia's instructions. Just Tessa framed as a criminal. $23,000. That's what Zinnia paid to buy a witness who would later become the person who destroyed her entire plan. Tessa sat staring at the screen, understanding finally. Not a partnership, a setup. She'd been the scapegoat from day one, and the money that paid her debts was now evidence of bribery. She opened a new browser tab, searched Business Attorney Portland. First result, Graham Sterling elder law and fraud cases. She clicked the phone number, dialed before she could change her mind. I was sitting in Graham's office reviewing documents when his phone rang at 11 p.m. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number, almost didn't answer. Then he picked up. Graham Sterling. A woman's voice shaking. Mr. Sterling, my name is Tessa Wren. I helped Zinnia Voss steal from Beatrice Langford, and I just found out she's planning to send me to prison for it. Graham's face changed, from alert to satisfied to almost gentle. Miss Wren, he said, and I knew from his tone alone that the final piece had just fallen into place. I've been hoping you'd call. Tessa arrived at Graham's office at 9 in the morning carrying a canvas tote bag I'd never seen before. She set it on his conference table with the careful reverence of someone handling evidence, which I suppose she was. The April sunlight came through the window behind her, turning her hair gold at the edges. I've been collecting things, she said, for 3 months now. Every time I found something I photographed, it documented where it came from and put the original somewhere safe. Graham pulled the bag toward him. His reading glasses were already on the ones he wore when reviewing contracts. Walk me through what you have. Tessa began unpacking. Text messages between Zinnia and someone named Marcus discussing the inheritance timeline and keeping Nolan dependent. Bank statements showing transfers from Nolan's account to Zinnia's, always in amounts just under $10,000. I recognized the pattern now, the way she'd stayed below reporting thresholds. Emails to a real estate agent in Charleston about investment properties I knew nothing about, printed on paper that still smelled faintly of ink. There's more, Tessa said, reaching back into the bag. She pulled out a leather notebook burgundy with gold edging, the kind you'd buy at an expensive stationery store, meant to look important. I found this in a box in their storage unit. Zinnia thought she'd hidden it well. Graham opened it. His expression changed as he read the first page. His eyebrows drew together, and he stopped breathing for just a moment. What is it? I asked. He turned the notebook toward me. The date at the top read September 2020, the same month she had walked into the county records office to search my property files, the one he claimed was a coincidence, a beautiful accident. Below it, in Zinnia's precise handwriting, Nolan Langford, 43, architect at Morrison & Hale, single. Mother Beatrice, 68, owns established tailoring business commercial property downtown. Father deceased, 2019, estate settled. Only child, no siblings to split inheritance. Perfect. I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. She'd researched him, targeted him specifically because I owned something worth taking. Not because she loved him, not even because she wanted him, because his mother had assets. She planned this, I said. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else's mouth. From the beginning, she planned all of it. Tessa's hand found mine across the table. Her fingers were warm. Keep reading. The next pages detailed everything. where Nolan went for coffee each morning. Bean and brew on 5th, always at 7:30. His routine at the gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The name of his favorite restaurant, the one where he took clients. Notes about his interests, his vulnerabilities, even a list of conversation topics labeled connection points. She'd studied him like a hunter studies prey, learning his patterns, his weaknesses, the exact shape of the trap she needed to build. Further, in dated October 2020, introduced myself today. He smiled when I mentioned architecture exactly as predicted. We'll see him again Wednesday. November 2020, early relationship progressing well. He's mentioned his mother twice, described her as stubborn and traditional, useful to know. November 2020, late met, the mother finally. She's suspicious but manageable. Nolan dismisses her concerns as overprotection. The business is worth more than initial research suggested. Property alone could sell for $1.2 million. Christ, Graham said quietly. He was photographing each page with his phone, the camera clicking softly in the quiet office. This is premeditation documented in her own handwriting. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the polished wood of the conference table, trying to anchor myself to something solid. Every smile, every story about her difficult childhood, every tear during our arguments, all of it scripted, calculated. She'd engineered not just Nolan's feelings, but his entire reality, and I'd been a supporting character in her scheme from the moment she decided we were worth robbing. Graham's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. It's Holden Reeves, Nolan's attorney. I asked him to call this morning. He answered on speaker. Graham, I've got a situation, Holden said. His voice sounded tight, strained. Zinnia fired me yesterday, told Nolan I wasn't representing his interests aggressively enough. She's hired someone else just for herself, though. Nolan still doesn't have counsel. She cut him loose, Graham said. There was no surprise in his voice. We'd all seen it coming, I realized. The only question had been when. Tessa's jaw tightened. I felt something crack open in my chest, not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. There's something else, Holden continued. I went to see Nolan anyway off the record. Told him Zinnia had retained separate counsel. He didn't say much, but he asked me to pass along a message to his mother. A pause. He said, tell my mother I'm sorry about the scissors. The line went quiet. Graham looked at me confused. Tessa's eyes widened. She understood, or at least she understood that it meant something. I closed mine. 3 words about a pair of scissors, but we both knew it meant everything else too. The scissors were a code, Graham explained later. Nolan's way of saying he understood what he'd broken wasn't just fabric or thread or business contracts. It was trust measured in decades and stitched into every seam his grandfather had taught me to sew. Graham spread 47 pages of evidence across the conference table, like a card-sharp dealing a winning hand. August heat pressed against the windows of his law office, but inside the air conditioning hummed cold enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. 4 months had passed since Tessa delivered Zinnia's notebook. 4 months of depositions motions, legal strategy sessions that blurred together into one long preparation for this moment. That the notebook alone proves premeditation, Graham said, but the video evidence will break her. Holden Reeves, the criminal defense attorney who'd represented Nolan until Zinnia fired him, sat with arms crossed, watching the evidence pile grow. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. Mira sat beside me, reading through her testimony notes. I watched B run that studio for 40 years, she said. The jury will know she never abandoned it. Eleanor had her own stack of photographs, the destroyed wedding dress, the vandalized workshop, the paint-splattered walls. I've testified before, she said quietly, at my divorce hearing. I know how to tell the truth when someone's trying to rewrite it. Tessa would testify about the $23,000 about Zinnia's instructions to lie about finding the notebook in the storage unit. Graham had coached her twice already. Her voice stayed steady when she practiced, but her hands shook. They chose you, Graham told me, gesturing to the women around the table. That matters. Edmund used to say family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when everything falls apart. Edmund had said that. I'd forgotten, but hearing it now, I understood what he'd meant. The family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. It has to be. You build it deliberately, brick by brick, knowing exactly what it costs and choosing to pay anyway. 4 months ago, I'd sat in this same conference room learning my son was a victim too. Now we were learning how to prove it. September arrived with the kind of bright, merciless sunshine that makes everything look sharper than it is. Multnomah County Courthouse rose gray and institutional against the blue sky, its steps crowded with lawyers and defendants, and people whose lives had been interrupted by the machinery of justice. Graham walked beside me. Mira and Tessa followed. We moved through security through marble hallways that echoed into a courtroom that smelled of old wood and recycled air. Nolan sat at the defense table looking like someone I used to know, thinner, grayer at the temples. He didn't meet my eyes when I passed, but I saw his shoulders tighten, the small flinch of recognition or shame or both. Zinnia sat separately with her attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit who'd made his career defending white-collar criminals. She wore navy with pearl earrings, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She looked serene, composed, like someone attending a business meeting, not a trial for fraud and vandalism and the systematic destruction of a family she'd targeted for profit. Judge Carmichael, a stern woman in her early 60s with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain, presided from the bench with no-nonsense efficiency. "This court is now in session," she said. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed with opening evidence." Graham stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to present security footage from 2 separate dates. The jury needs to see what really happened." Zinnia's attorney rose immediately. "Objection, prejudicial." "Overruled," Judge Carmichael said without hesitation. "The footage is material to the fraud and vandalism charges." The lights dimmed. A screen descended from the ceiling. Graham pressed play. November 14th, 2022, 9:47 p.m. The backstage area at my studio, captured by the security camera I'd installed after the first vandalism incident. On screen, Nolan stood with my scissors in his hand, the ones his grandfather had given me, the ones I'd used for 40 years. He looked at them. Then he threw them in the trash. The camera angle caught Zinnia's face perfectly. She turned toward the lens without knowing it was there, her expression shifting into something I recognize now: false sympathy, performed, concern, the bless-her-heart smile of someone pretending to care. Behind her, barely visible, I left the room wordlessly. "Note the timestamp," Graham said. November 14th, 2022, 9:47 p.m. Note Mrs. Voss's expression. On camera, Zinnia's concern looked like a mask. The jury could see what I'd missed, in real time, the performance. The calculation, the woman who'd orchestrated my son's cruelty and felt nothing but satisfaction. Across the courtroom, Nolan whispered something to his lawyer. It might have been, "Turn it off, please." You can see a lot in 3 minutes of silence. You can see who feels shame and who doesn't. Graham pressed play on the second video. "January 18th, he said. "Outside camera, 3 minutes, 12 seconds. The exterior camera showed the full vandalism sequence. Night. The workshop door opening. Nolan with cans of paint. Zinnia directing, pointing, orchestrating. 3 minutes of destruction windows, broken walls splattered the sign Edmund had commissioned, hanging crooked on one hinge. Methodical, deliberate. A coordinated attack on everything my family had built. When it ended, the courtroom stayed silent. Nolan stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. The jury watched him. Watched Zinnia. Watched the space between them that had opened into a canyon. I watched Zinnia. Her breathing never changed, steady, composed, perfectly controlled. She'd seen herself destroy my family on camera and felt nothing. "The court will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Carmichael said. The courtroom was silent when the video ended. In that silence, I heard my daughter-in-law's perfectly composed breathing. She had watched herself destroy my family and felt nothing. The feeling you can't name is sometimes the most honest one. Sitting in that courtroom watching Zinnia breathe like she was attending a theater performance instead of her own trial, I felt something beyond anger or grief. It was clarity, cold and absolute. Eleanor Hartley raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth about the night she watched my son destroy a wedding dress. She wore gray that day, her silver hair pulled back her hands, steady on the witness stand railing. Graham approached with the careful respect he gave people who'd earned it. Ms. Hartley, can you describe what you witnessed on January 18, 2023? I was locking up my shop around 9, Eleanor said. Her voice carried clearly through the courtroom. I saw someone breaking the window at Beatrice's studio. I recognized Nolan immediately. I've known him since he was a boy. I called the police, but before they arrived, I watched him go inside and tear apart a dress on the work table. Whose dress was it? Eleanor's expression softened, turned sad. My niece's wedding dress. Beatrice was making it for free as a gift. She'd been working on it for 3 months. The jury shifted. Several members looked at me. I kept my face neutral, but Eleanor's voice cracked on the word gift, and I knew the jury heard what I'd lost, not just business, but the joy of giving the satisfaction of creating something beautiful for someone else's happiness. Graham let that settle. Then, Ms. Hartley, in your 40 years as Mrs. Langford's neighbor who is the real Langford legacy, Eleanor looked directly at me. She always has been. Graham thanked her. Zinnia's attorney had no questions. What could he ask? Eleanor had simply told the truth. Day 3 brought the evidence Graham had been saving. He stood before the jury with a single sheet of paper in his hand, and I knew from his expression that whatever it contained would change everything. Exhibit 47, he said. Email dated May 3, 2021, 2 weeks before the wedding. He read it aloud. The son is the stupid door to the old woman's assets. Once I'm inside, I just need her signature. The courtroom erupted. Someone gasped. Judge Carmichael's gavel came down hard. Order. The court will have order. Nolan sat perfectly still, but his hands flat on the table had gone white at the knuckles. Zinnia's face flushed red for the first time since the trial began. Not shame, I realized, but fury at being exposed. Graham wasn't finished. The defendant sent this to Marcus Bellamy, her former business partner. She also accessed property records for 341 Oak Street in September 2020, before she officially met Nolan Langford. The records show searches for commercial property valuations, business license databases, and estate planning documents. Nolan had been the door, I had been the vault, and my signature had been the only thing standing between her and everything. The jury took notes. Judge Carmichael took notes. Zinnia's attorney requested a recess and was denied. Mrs. Voss, you may take the stand, the judge said. Zinnia rose with the same composed grace she'd maintained for 3 days. She wore pale blue today pearls again, her hair perfect. She looked like someone who volunteered at hospitals and baked cookies for school fundraisers. I realized exactly how she'd looked the day I met her, carefully constructed to appear harmless. Her attorney walked her through the victim narrative they'd prepared. Beatrice was controlling, jealous, unwilling to share her son with another woman. The business was struggling anyway. Nolan had simply wanted to modernize it, and his mother refused to listen. Mrs. Voss, Graham said when his turn came, if your intentions were legitimate, why did you register Blackthorn Bridal in your name only 3 months before your husband was arrested? Zinnia's composure cracked. Because I knew she would do this, I was protecting myself. Protecting yourself from what, Mrs. Voss? From her, Zinnia's voice rose. The jury leaned forward. She poisoned everyone against me from the beginning. She never gave me a chance. She made Nolan choose between us, and when he finally stood up to her, she called the police and had him arrested. Mrs. Voss, your husband, vandalized the business. The security footage, because she refused. Zinnia was standing now, her hands gripping the witness stand railing. If she had just signed the papers when we asked, none of this would have happened. The courtroom went silent. Graham let the words hang there. He didn't need to repeat them. The jury had heard it. Judge Carmichael had heard it. 7 words if she had just signed the papers. Confession. Complete and public and witnessed by everyone who mattered. How many people confessed to fraud while trying to claim innocence? Zinnia seemed to realize what she'd said. She sat down slowly, her face pale now, her hands trembling. Her attorney started to object, then sat back down. There was nothing to object to. She'd said it herself. Graham turned to Judge Carmichael. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge set her pen down carefully, the kind of deliberate movement that signaled thought consideration, the weight of what she'd just witnessed. She looked at Zinnia, then at the jury, then at the transcript the court reporter was typing in real time. "This court stands adjourned until Friday for closing arguments," she said. The jury is reminded not to discuss the case. If she had just signed the papers. 7 words that confirmed everything. The judge set her pen down, and in the silence that followed, 40 years of my life were finally completely vindicated. Vindication in a courtroom is a moment. Living with it afterward is the work. 3 weeks passed between Zinnia's confession and the day we returned to hear what justice looked like when it was finally measured and delivered. The courtroom rose when Judge Carmichael entered at 10 a.m. on October 16th to deliver the verdict we'd been waiting 3 weeks to hear. Mira sat beside me, her hand finding mine. Graham sat at the attorney's table with his notes and his careful optimism. Nolan sat at the defense table looking thinner than he had at the trial, his suit hanging loose at the shoulders. Zinnia sat separately, perfectly composed again, as if the outburst 3 weeks ago had been someone else's breakdown. Judge Carmichael adjusted her reading glasses. The courtroom settled into that particular silence that means everyone is holding their breath. "Mr. Langford." She began looking directly at my son. "You were manipulated. The evidence makes that clear. But manipulation doesn't erase agency. You still made choices to vandalize property, to violate a restraining order, to threaten your mother. This court finds you guilty of property damage, criminal threats, and restraining order violation." Nolan's shoulders dropped. "However," Judge Carmichael continued, "this court also recognizes coercion and psychological abuse as mitigating factors. Your sentence, 8 months incarceration time, served to count 2 years probation, $15,000 restitution. 8 months. He'd already served 4. 4 more months and my son would be free of this, though not of what he'd done, not of what he'd destroyed or who he'd become in the process." Mira whispered, "It's fair, B. It's actually fair." It was. Justice tempered with mercy. Accountability balanced with recognition that he'd been a weapon someone else had aimed. Judge Carmichael turned to Zinnia, her expression hardened. "Mrs. Voss, the evidence against you is extensive and damning. The jury found you guilty of data theft, unfair competition, defamation, and fraud. The civil judgment, $380,000 in damages." $380,000. I felt something click into place, a kind of cosmic symmetry. Almost exactly what she'd calculated my business was worth when she targeted my son. Almost exactly what she'd written in her notebook property alone could sell for $1.2 million total assets after debts around $380,000. "Blackthorn Bridal will be dissolved," the judge continued. "All assets acquired through fraudulent means will be returned to Mrs. Langford. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist all business operations using Langford intellectual property client lists or proprietary designs." Graham leaned over and whispered, "Poetic justice, B." It was more than that, it was mathematics. She'd calculated what I was worth, hunted it methodically, and now she'd pay back every dollar she'd tried to steal. Justice isn't symmetrical, but sometimes it rhymes. Judge Carmichael addressed the remaining parties, Ryder Knox and 2 others, who'd helped with the vandalism with fines and probation. Minor players in someone else's scheme punished appropriately, but not destroyed. The bailiff stood. "All rise." As they led Nolan toward the side door, he turned back. Just for a moment. His eyes met mine across 40 feet of courtroom and 45 years of history. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just held his gaze. I was still standing. I had always been standing. Maybe now he could see that. Then he was gone and the courtroom emptied, and Mira drove me home through October sunshine that felt almost too bright, too clear, like the world had been scrubbed clean while I wasn't looking. Tessa arrived at my porch late that afternoon. I was sitting in Edmund's chair, the one he'd repaired 3 times rather than replace, because he said good things were worth fixing. I heard her car before I saw it, that distinctive rattle of a vehicle, held together by hope and duct tape. She climbed the steps slowly like someone approaching a house they weren't sure they'd be allowed to enter. "Mrs. Langford," she said, "I know I don't have the right to be here, but I had to tell you myself. I'm sorry for all of it." I studied her. 26, Graham had said, younger than I'd thought. Her hands twisted together, and I recognized the gesture, fear, shame, the physical manifestation of wishing you could disappear. "Sit," I said, gesturing to the other chair. She sat like someone expecting the chair to collapse. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quietly. "I just needed you to know I'm sorry for all of it. The money, the lies, watching her destroy you and not stopping it. I was scared, and that's not an excuse, but it's the truth." "You were scared," I said, "and someone offered you a way out that turned out to be a way deeper in. I understand that." Her eyes widened. "How do you forgive yourself for something like this?" I thought about that, about Nolan at the defense table, about Zinnia's notebook, about 40 years of building something and watching it nearly fall apart because I'd trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. "Forgiveness isn't for them," I said finally. "It's so you don't carry their weight forever. You were 23 when this started. That's young enough to make mistakes and old enough to learn from them." Tessa wiped her eyes. "I wish I could undo it." "You can't, but you can do something different going forward." She nodded, then hesitantly, "Could you teach me to sew? I want to make something instead of—" She stopped, unable to finish. 40 years ago, Edmund taught me to thread a needle. Today I was learning to thread forgiveness through anger, harder, but just as necessary. "Come back in January," I said. "I'm opening something new, not the same studio, something different. You can learn there with everyone else who's starting over. You'd let me—" "Everyone deserves a second chance," I said. "Even people who helped destroy the first one." She left with tears in her eyes and a date marked in her calendar. And I sat on my porch thinking about Edmund, who always said, "The best thing you can make isn't a dress. It's a second chance." Second chances sound simple until you're the one who has to offer them. Then they're complicated and terrifying and necessary all at once. But Edmund had been right about most things, and I had to believe he was right about this too. The white lace spread across my work table looked nothing like the torn pieces Eleanor had gathered from my floor 10 months ago. November brought cold rain and shorter days, but inside the renovated workshop, I'd stopped calling it just mine. It belonged to all of us now. Warmth from the space heaters and the quiet rhythm of work filled the hours. Mira sat across from me, her needle moving through silk with the confidence of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. "It's more beautiful than the first one, B," she said, holding up the bodice to catch the light. "Stronger, too." She was right. The seams were reinforced, the beadwork more intricate. 3 months of work destroyed in minutes, now rebuilt with better technique lessons learned from the first attempt. Edmund used to say, "You can't fix a mistake by pretending it didn't happen," I said, threading my needle. "You fix it by making something better from what's left." I'd visited Nolan the week before. No tears, no apologies we hadn't already made. Just, "I'm still your mother." And he'd said, "I know." It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a door left open instead of locked. Mira adjusted her reading glasses. "You know what I've been thinking about the insurance money and the settlement funds. We could transform this place, not just rebuild, reimagine it. Into what? An academy. Free vocational training for women who need it, older women whose jobs disappeared, single mothers, people starting over." She looked up at me. "People like Tessa, people who need to learn they can build something with their own hands." The idea settled over me like fabric finding its drape. Not a business that enriched the owner, a legacy that multiplied itself through others. "What do we call it?" Mira asked. "The Academy." I looked at Edmund's photograph on the wall, the one from opening day in 1980, his arm around my shoulders, both of us exhausted and exhilarated, and certain we were building something that would last. Langford Bridal Academy, I said. His name, my work, their future. Mira smiled. Our work! You don't do this alone anymore, Bea. She was right about that, too. I'd spent 40 years believing independence meant doing everything yourself. Now I understood it meant knowing when to let others help carry what you couldn't lift alone. A pair of scissors thrown in the trash, a legacy almost buried with them. Funny how both could be saved. Mira set down her needle. She reached into her handbag, the same worn leather one she'd carried for 20 years, and pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. She placed it on the table between us. I knew what it was before she unwrapped it. The silver caught the overhead light, familiar and impossible. I took them home that night, Mira said quietly. After the party, I couldn't leave them in the trash where he threw them. I stared at the scissors. Edmund's scissors. Mine for 43 years, thrown away by my son, saved by my friend. The handles were slightly tarnished, but still elegant. The blades still perfectly aligned. 43 years. I said, picking them up. The weight was exactly as I remembered. Edmund's inscription still visible on the handle, to my partner in every stitch. Edmund gave me these the day we opened. Then they should cut the first stitch of what comes next, Mira said. I held them, testing the movement. They opened and closed smoothly, no resistance, no damage from being discarded. Tools that good don't break just because someone throws them away. Neither do people I was learning. They still work perfectly, I said. Mira's eyes were bright. So do you. I positioned the scissors over the new dress fabric silk, the color of cream, meant for Eleanor's niece's second chance at the wedding dress she'd never gotten to wear. The cut was clean. Precise. Like the 43 years before that night had never stopped. Like I'd been interrupted but not erased. January arrived with unusual sunshine, the kind that makes everything look possible. Uru, the renovated studio Langford Bridal Academy, now the sign freshly painted, filled with people on opening day. Graham brought champagne. Eleanor brought flowers. Holden Reeves came surprisingly and told me he'd added us to his pro bono referral list for women escaping difficult situations. Tessa stood near the door with 11 other women, all of them holding intake packets, all of them wearing the same expression, hope, mixed with uncertainty, the face of someone who's been promised things before and learned not to trust promises. What makes a legacy? The name on the building or the hands that learn inside it? Graham raised his glass. To second chances and the woman who makes them possible. To all of us who make them possible. I corrected, looking at Mira, at Eleanor, at the 12 women who'd shown up to learn something they'd never imagined learning. Tessa stepped forward, her voice steady. 6 months ago, I helped destroy this place, she said to the other students. Today I'm learning to build instead. You can too. The scissors sat in a glass case on the wall, now preserved and honored. Below them, a small plaque. A legacy doesn't belong to those who inherit it. It belongs to those who honor it. Edmund's name. My name. An honor roll that would grow as students graduated. Nolan's name wasn't on it. Maybe someday it would be. But legacies aren't inherited anymore in this building, they're earned. I watched 12 women take their seats at workstations Mira and I had built together. 12 women. 12 stories. 12 pairs of hands that had never held a needle and thread but were about to learn. Edmund had said this studio was a legacy. He was right. He just didn't know yet whose legacy it would truly become. A legacy becomes what you make of it after someone tries to destroy it. That's what I learned in the space between January and March, watching 12 women transform from uncertain strangers into something that looked like hope. The morning light through the academy windows hit the white fabric exactly the way it used to in Edmund's studio 44 years ago. March arrived with the kind of spring morning that makes you believe in second chances, whether you want to or not. The Academy's first official class day. Not the orientation in January, but the real beginning, the day we stopped talking about what we would teach and started teaching it. Eleanor arrived first, which didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the dress she wore. White lace, seed pearls, The bodice I'd reinforced with French seams. The hem I'd weighted perfectly so it wouldn't catch when she walked. Her niece's wedding dress, the one Nolan destroyed, the one Mira and I had remade into something more beautiful than the original. She crossed the room and pulled me into an embrace that smelled like lavender and salt from tears she was already crying. She cried the whole ceremony, Eleanor said. Happy tears because of you. I made a dress, Eleanor. You made her feel beautiful. Eleanor pulled back, holding my shoulders. No, you made something beautiful from what was destroyed. That's different. Mira arrived with coffee and the practical observation that if we were going to cry before 9 a.m., we'd never make it through the first lesson. The 12 students filtered in, Tessa among them, early and nervous and determined. They took their seats at workstations that still smelled faintly of fresh varnish. I stood at the front of the room holding the silver scissors for the first time before a crowd since the night Nolan threw them away. My hands remembered their weight. My heart remembered what they meant. These are 44 years old, I said, holding them up so the light caught the inscription Edmund had engraved. They've cut thousands of pieces. Someone once told me they were worthless. He was wrong. I didn't say who. I didn't need to. The story wasn't about him anymore. Every cut has to be intentional, I continued. You don't just cut fabric, you cut toward something beautiful, toward a shape you can see in your mind but doesn't exist yet in the world. One of the students, a woman in her 50s whose intake form said she'd been laid off from manufacturing and needed new skills, raised her hand. What if you make a mistake? Then you make something else beautiful from what's left, I said. That's not failure. That's adaptation. 2 years ago, I thought legacy meant protecting what Edmund built. I was wrong. Legacy means knowing when to let it become something else. We worked through basic cuts that morning. Straight lines, first harder than they look, requiring steady hands and steadier intention. I moved between workstations, adjusting angles, demonstrating technique, watching 12 women discover they could do something they'd never imagined doing. Mira taught alongside me. So did Tessa, surprisingly demonstrating the backstitch she'd learned in January with the careful pride of someone who'd earned knowledge the hard way. The letter arrived 3 days later. I recognized the return address before I saw the name. Multnomah County Detention Center. My kitchen was quiet that morning, just me and coffee and an envelope I stared at for 5 full minutes before opening. Nolan's handwriting, uneven like he'd written it slowly, thinking about each word. Mom, I know sorry isn't enough. I know I can't fix what I broke, not the scissors, not the shop, not the years. But I need you to know I understand now what I did. Not just the vandalism or the theft. I understand I tried to erase you. To make you small enough that I could pretend you didn't matter. Graham told me about the academy. I think Dad would have loved it. I think you knew that all along, that the best thing you could build wasn't a business for me to inherit, but something that would outlive both of us. I don't know if I'll be the man you deserve when I get out, but I'm going to try to find out. Nolan. No requests, no appeals for money or early release or forgiveness he knew he hadn't earned. Just truth, uncomfortable and honest, and late, but real. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer with Edmund's old sketch notes and the first invoice from 1980. History, all of it. Some of it beautiful, some of it broken, all of it part of the foundation that held up what came next. The first lesson ended with students laughing, which felt like its own kind of miracle. They packed up their practice pieces and scheduled fabric with the confidence of people who'd accomplished something small but real. Mira cleared the work tables. Same time Thursday. Same time Thursday, I said. When the room emptied, I walked to the glass display case mounted on the wall. The scissors inside caught the afternoon light. Below them, the plaque "A legacy doesn't belong to those who inherit it. It belongs to those who honor it." I opened the case. The scissors fit into my hand like they'd never left. You want to know what winning looks like? Not the courtroom, not the money. This, right here. 12 women learning what someone tried to take from me. I carried them to the cutting table where white fabric weighted material for the Academy's first community project, wedding alterations for women who couldn't afford seamstresses. I positioned the scissors at the marked line. Edmund gave me these to build something. Nolan tried to throw them away, but they're still here. So am I. The cut was clean and deliberate. The fabric fell away in exactly the shape I intended. Outside, March wind rattled the windows. Inside the space Edmund built and I rebuilt hummed with the potential energy of women learning they could create instead of just endure. This place is no longer what my son wanted to take. It is where women learn to stand up. And today, we begin. And to you listening to my story, remember this legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you refuse to let anyone steal from you. For 43 years, I built something with my own hands. When my son tried to take it away, I almost let him because I thought protecting him meant surrendering everything. That was my mistake. I confused love with letting someone destroy me. Don't make that mistake. Standing up for yourself isn't revenge, it's survival. And sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you never imagined would. This wasn't about grandma revenge or getting even. This was about refusing to disappear. Some people call it raw revenge when an older woman fights back, but I call it refusing to be erased. Standing up isn't the same as striking down. When you build something good, you defend it. That's not anger, that's dignity. I believe God gave me the strength to transform what could have been bitter grandma revenge into something that helps other women. Raw revenge burns out. Purpose rebuilds. That's the difference. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think I was right to fight back, or should I have walked away? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it. And if you believe in stories about standing strong, subscribe to Her Family Revenge. We need more voices speaking truth. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note, some details in this story were fictionalized to protect privacy and emphasize the lesson. What matters is the truth about resilience, dignity, and refusing to be erased.